He's thinking, okay, the whole world saw his meltdown against Carlsen. He wants to put those ghosts to rest, for sure. And he looks sharp. I do miss the man bun, I must admit.
But you must like the shirt.
I love
Isn't
the shirt,
that,
Kaya.
a little bit of a...
It's a Union Jack.
Yeah,
it's
saying hello to David and Jovanka.
Yes.
Very nice, Jan.
Exactly. And, okay, first couple of moves. It is a Queen's Pawn opening, and will we see... Okay, it is the Catalan opening. This was the linchpin of Magnus's opening preparation for the World Championship match. And they had an ongoing debate in Poland over the New Year at the World Rapid Championship. They actually played each other in a Catalan opening as well, again. So this one, a bit of history, and Magnus has forced Nepomniachtchi to think. He's looking off to the side there. That's not because he's looking at anything in particular. It's just he's trying to go into recall mode. And look at Nepomniachtchi, deep in concentration already, trying to remember what he had studied 6 months ago, or even more recently for the World Championship match. This position, I'm pretty sure he's gone into detail on, but can he remember? Magnus will have studied it this morning, most likely. So it's going to be fresher in his mind. And the mind games have begun.
Yeah. How is Magnus sort of feeling now and doing now? And what is on the back of his head after a bad loss against Sipenko in the last round?
Yeah, it's going to be hard for him, but he is known as the king of bouncing back.
Yeah.
Nearly never see Magnus lose 2 games in a row.
True.
One, it happens to everyone, but Magnus is great and very strong psychologically. He'll be quite philosophical. He'll say, OK, he lost in the last round, but he came up against Sipenko, who was inspired, who just played a great game. Life goes on. It's still the prelim stage. And, he'll be trying to refocus.
I have to say, one thing is that I recently spoke to Henrik Carlsen in an interview, and he gave a real insight into how Magnus's mentality is after a loss. He is just basically focused on the next target. He's like, it's OK, move on to the next game, the end.
Yeah. It's easy to say, but hard to do, and Magnus does it very, very well. And meanwhile, the game has continued. There have been some exchanges. So White sacrificed a pawn a few moves ago. He hasn't regained that pawn yet. Now he does have the opportunity to do that. We do see White's queen on the c-file can just step up 2 squares, capture a black pawn, but that would allow Black's knight that has just moved, the one highlighted in orange there, to swing across to the left, attack the White queen, and attack one of White's remaining pawns. And I'm trying to recall if this is exactly the course of Magnus Carlsen against Anish Giri from Vaikanze. I think it might be very similar. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same
It is
game.
exactly the same game, yeah. And that one, Magnus beat Anish Giri.
Yeah, so Magnus has fond memories of this position, but for sure, Nepomniachtchi will have gone and studied that game. I think all of the top players, when they see big new opening ideas from their rivals, they go away, they study those positions just in case it crops up in their own games. So Magnus there, bringing his rook across, and Nepomniachtchi, what's he going to do? Is he going to move his knight? Is he going to push a pawn? No, he centralises his bishop instead.
And this is Nepomniachtchi's new move, because in the Giri game, he actually picked up his a-pawn and moved it 1 square. And instead, he has moved his bishop to overprotect the pawn that was under attack. And the big idea is that once White threatens to push his pawn 2 squares forward, the e-pawn that is, Nepomniachtchi just ignores it and just moves his rook to the c-line, getting ready for the pawn break along that line.
OK, so has this been played before, Jovanka?
No.
Never?
No.
So this last move is new, or the last couple of moves?
The last couple of moves, the bishop moving to the d5 square is totally new. And this idea, also incredibly novel.
OK, wow, so fresh territory for the 2 players. It's going to be interesting who continues to play quickly. After this point, they've both actually gained time on the clock. They've got more time than they started the game with. Magnus slightly frowning as well. Maybe he's confused by Nepomniachtchi's quick moves. And to be honest, I am as well. It feels like Black has lost a bit of time, especially with the Black bishop. Black's bishop kind of zigzagged its way into the game. Then it stepped forward to the centre. Now it stepped back. He's provoked White into gaining space in the centre with the White pawns. Look at those 2 White central pawns. But those pawns might be a strength. Yes, they could be a target as well, but Magnus now retreating his knight. He's going after Black's extra pawn on the c4 square.
But you know what, David? I'm just looking at the bar. Okay. And my first thought was that this must be a novel idea by Nepomniachtchi, again, provoking the centre. Looking at the bar hates it.
But, yeah.
I don't think this is in any shape or form preparation. This is just Nepomniachtchi perhaps being caught off guard and, like you say, freestyling.
Yep. Possibly Nepomniachtchi freestyling, or possibly he just maybe mixed up his move orders. These types of positions, often you know the ideas, you know you want to bring your rook across, you want to park your bishop in the centre, but often if you mix it up, if you get it in the wrong order, the consequences might be dire. And right now, Black's pawn was doomed, and now he's offering it up for free, or seemingly so. He has ideas in mind if White captures this pawn that has just advanced. Let's check out the repercussions. If White does go for the most natural move and take this pawn, just to show as well, this position, this pawn is doomed. The White knight is just simply going to capture it next move anyway, and there's no way to defend it. So the pawn does push. If White takes, then suddenly this pawn on the side, which does look a bit irrelevant, can be captured. The White queen no longer protecting it. Black would capture with the bishop, and I still love White's position, to be honest. White has these central pawns. White has the two bishops. Later on, these bishops are going to be fantastic along these diagonals once the position opens up. But Black is temporarily a pawn up. So maybe the most simple move, or at least the first move that comes to my mind, is not to capture this pawn, is simply to move the White knight back even further. Not to its start square. Remember, this knight actually originated on the other side of the board, on the G1 square, but somehow it zigzagged its way to the start square of its friend, of its other knight. And next move, it's just going to capture on C3 and restore material parity. And there we see the head-to-head temporarily of the two players. Magnus slightly ahead in last season's Champions Chess Tour. But yeah, if he makes this knight retreat, if he drops his knight back and then captures this pawn, I have a feeling his head-to-head score might increase against Nepomniachtchi.
They have had a very interesting history on the Champions Chess Tour, because I remember their first time they played a knockout match was all the way in the beginning in Skilling Open, and there it was Magnus Carlsen who was victorious, and then they played each other in the Magnus Carlsen Invitational, and it was Nepomniachtchi who won, who ruined the party for Magnus at his very own tournament. How rude. But anyway, I joke. Yeah, I have to say, David, love your backward knight move. I didn't actually see it. I was just considering the knight jumping forward. But no, it makes total sense.
Yeah, there's some stuff to calculate. For example, if the White knight does drop back, Black's knight in front of the Black queen can move out the way, opening up the Black queen's vision against some pawns. But I think all of that does work out in White's favour. The more I look at it, the more I think White is simply going to gain the pawn back, and White will have the long-term advantage of the central pawns. They're controlling everything, and the two White bishops, they're only going to gain in power the longer the game goes on. So I think Magnus has two good moves, at least, maybe even more. Just dropping the knight back makes the most sense to me. He could even just capture this pawn. Magnus of the last few years is more kind of inclined to sacrifice pawns. He's been influenced by his work with Daniel Dubov, for example, who just sacrifices pawns like they're nothing. But okay, this time Magnus doesn't capture the black pawn, giving up his side pawn. He does go for the move I suggested, bringing his knight back. And the evaluation bar doesn't like it initially, but it does look pretty good to me still. And now Black brought a knight out, attacking White's pawn on the side. Magnus reacting by pushing it forward, attacking the Black knight, and Nepomniachtchi.
It's only one move. He has to jump forward with his knight and attack the bishop.
Yep, that would be the most logical. His knight is under fire, so he has to jump into White's half. You could potentially make an argument for jumping it the other way, maybe the the Black knight to the edge of the board, to the A4 square, but that looks so wrong. Looks so unnatural, putting a knight on the edge.
But and on a square where it will never get out as well.
Exactly,
so,
trapping your own knight. But yeah, I agree with you. Just instinct-wise, bring the Black knight in towards the centre, to the C4 square, and at least try and trade off some pieces. That's the key normally. If you're suffering in terms of space, if your opponent has the pawn centre, like White does here, just try and trade pieces off, because then you have more breathing space. You don't want too many pieces on the board, because then you'll just get suffocated. Your pieces will fight for the same squares, and yeah, long term that won't work out for you. So trading pieces is normally the key.
There is a pressing question, though, that Magnus has to answer once the Black knight does jump into the C4 square, attacking the bishop, and that is what's going to happen with the pawn in the middle of the board. That's unprise.
Yeah,
are we going to give it up, or is White going to do something else? Maybe go on the counter-attack?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. And just to show the ideas that we've been discussing while Nepomniachtchi has his first real think of the game, we see that Black's knight is under attack from a mere pawn. It has to run away. I mentioned this knight move, which looks so unnatural, putting it on the edge of the board where it is trapped. I don't think we'll see that. It's so kind of counterintuitive. Instead, the most natural move mentioned by Jovanka is to bring the knight to this square, and 2 moves come into... OK, he's gone for the one we didn't expect. It was on my radar, but I just thought, OK, it will never happen. It's so ugly, that move. Just to explain this one, if the knight had jumped forward to this square, Magnus has options. He could save his bishop, or, for example, bring it forward 1 square, just tempting the black queen to come and capture a pawn, but then he would drop back, take this pawn, and once the queen moves, for example, black would now lose a piece after bishop takes knight. This knight is loose and will drop off. This looked very, very strong for Magnus. I was going to say the other option is just to capture this pawn with the white queen, take this pawn, and after this trade, white is still doing very, very well due to these pawns. But Nepomniachtchi, maybe just seeing this type of position and not liking it, he's gone for something even riskier, which could backfire. This knight attacked, he's parked it on the edge of the board. And, OK, Magnus doesn't try to trap this knight, he just takes a pawn. Very simple play. And now, if the knights come off, white is better because of this pawn centre still rock solid, and these bishops are just fantastic. Nepomniachtchi's gone for a riskier approach. He's taken this pawn, but this looks so dangerous. Black's queen is defending this knight on the edge of the board. The bishop is as well. So Black's position well, he's not losing anything yet, but it's hanging by a thread. For example, if the white knight moves, I think white is doing well. I'm trying to work out the consequences of pushing this pawn forward. Partly attacking this knight, partly trying to get rid of this bishop, which is a defender of Black's knight on this side, remember. But suddenly it's becoming a bit chaotic, as we see by all the arrows, and Magnus doesn't want the chaos. He just trades off on this square, after queen takes pawn, sorry. He just takes this knight, and after the black queen recaptures...
Ooh.
Yeah, suddenly I was about to say, I think Magnus is still doing pretty well, but suddenly he is a pawn down. Black has a 3 versus 2 advantage here, and these doubled pawns are troubled pawns for white. These doubled pawns, not necessarily great either. So, OK, Magnus maybe just rushing and missing an opportunity there. Just if we backtrack, the move I said is complicated. Maybe Magnus should have at least invested 2 or 3 minutes working out the consequences there. I think he would have been doing quite well. Suddenly, Nepomniachtchi, I mentioned he took a risk. It's worked out for him because after knight takes knight, the queens have left the board, but black is a pawn up and white doesn't have the best structure in the world. Jovanka, surprised? Or?
I'm very, very surprised, actually, because I honestly thought that he would keep the queens on in the game and try to use the unchallenged power of his dark-squared bishop.
Yeah.
Even if it cost him 2 extra pawns, you know, that bishop could have been a nuisance. It's not going to... Yeah, the dark-square bishop there. And, yeah, especially on the long diagonal. And we saw some lines there where it was a real menace towards the black king. And just to trade off into an endgame, especially when white has such a poor pawn structure, well, I'm going to... It's the perfect opportunity to share with you some more lines and rhymes that our Twitterverse have come forward. And it goes, OK, so we do have a move. The bishop has retreated onto the long diagonal. And, oh no, one of them, the double pawns are going to disappear off the board. So I should say the rhymes very quickly.
Get it in quickly, Jovanka.
Before they disappear. OK, so Duke says, pawns in a column are uglier than Gollum.
Very nice.
Very good. And Miguel Rodriguez says, OK, white's just tucked the bishop to a better diagonal. Double pawns are ready to... Sorry, my double pawns are ready to mow your lawns.
Ooh, clever.
Yeah.
Yes.
And female nurse says, double pawns easily haunt.
Double pawns, easily haunt.
haunt.
You have to say it like quickly.
Yeah.
Easily haunt.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So very, very nice. Great suggestions from everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then talking of double pawns, there's a really intriguing kind of situation now with those white double pawns. If you look on the A line, the corner file there on the left, white's double pawns, there has been the opportunity for a few moves now to trade one of them off for one of the black pawns. So getting rid of your double pawns. Instead, white has left that tension. He's maintaining the tension now. And Magnus, he's actually offering up a second pawn. He's 1 pawn down. But if black goes and captures that white pawn on the edge of the board, suddenly black's pawns are doubled. They are the weak ones. They've lost their integrity. They no longer defend each other. And black actually doesn't want to get distracted. Grabbing a pawn, yes, but also creating a doubled pawn. Because if you look at black's pawn chain, they're far better on the left there as a team. They don't want to separate and isolate each other. And that's why the tension persists, and it's a bit of a bluff now. Magnus is saying, OK, I'm just going to leave that pawn for you to take as a bit of temptation for the rest of the game. And, yeah, Nepomniachtchi is so far resisting that temptation, centralising his rook. And actually, the last few moves have definitely gone in Black's favour. Black has started pushing on the side where he has the pawn advantage. Black's knight maybe not the best placed piece, but White can't challenge for the central file either, the D file, because Black's bishop on the edge of the board is actually very well placed on an outpost, can't really be kicked away. Yeah, Magnus, he kind of raced to this position. He had a promising opening, everything was going in his favour, and then suddenly one bad move and Nepomniachtchi is on top.
Wow.
That's how it works at the top level. If you're not on form, if you're careless for one moment, your opponent will take control.
Yeah, Magnus, he only has 4 points after 3 games, 1 win, 1 draw, and 1 loss. Jan Nepomniachtchi, 6 points after winning 2 games, losing 1 game. Remember, we are giving away more points this season for those wins. And Jan Nepomniachtchi, he is in shared second. We do have 3 players on 7 points. Andrei Esipenko, one of them, after 2 wins and a draw. So an exciting finish to the day. Magnus Carlsen, he definitely needs, he does not want to lose this game at all. He's going to be quite far behind already. Yeah.
He needs to do something differently. He's known as a slow starter, so he won't be panicking yet. Often Magnus loses the first game of the day before kind of racking up a series of wins in a row. But if he loses this one, or if he doesn't win this one, he's going to start worrying slightly ahead of tomorrow's action.
It is worrying because it's 3 bad games. You know, you have to go back to game 2.
3 white games today.
Yeah, exactly. And this, by nature, should have been quite a straightforward day, and I would have expected him to finish on a plus score. But, OK.
Can anything still happen, though, in this game, even if the bar is all the way over to Jan's side?
For sure, all 3 results are still possible. And actually, Magnus has set up a nasty trick. He's got a big, big threat in the position to win one of the black rooks. But, of course, Nepomniachtchi sees that. Maybe let's just go into the position just to explain what Magnus is trying to do, how he's trying to justify his pawn deficit. So right now, he's a pawn down, but his last move was to plant the bishop on this square. And if you look at the 2 bishops, this... Whoops, sorry, me and my arrows again, me and my mouse skills. This bishop cutting this diagonal, this bishop cutting the other diagonal. Black's rooks are lacking squares. So if Black was careless and just made a nothing move, then suddenly the white bishop would jump forward, and this is a pattern to remember for everyone at home. Now this rook lacks any escape squares. It's hit by the white bishop, the white light squared bishop, and it's also cut from retreating by the white dark squared bishop. That's why Nepomniachtchi stepped back with the knight. In this position, he stepped back with the knight, attacking white's bishop in the centre. There was no time to attack the black rook. The white bishop had to retreat, had to move, and now it was kicked back even further. And this is quite good strategy from Jan Nepomniachtchi. He lacks a dark squared bishop. White is the only one with a dark squared bishop. Therefore, he occupies the dark squares with pawns. He blunts the effect of his opponent's bishop with his own pawns. And it's looking good for Nepomniachtchi. Plenty of good moves here. For example, he could just bring his rook across. Remember, white cannot challenge for this file because of the black bishop on the edge of the board. He can bring this rook across. Oh, whoops, sorry, not there. He can just bring it across one square. He can bring his knight back, reroute the black knight, but he does go for this move. And black's just a pawn up. It's that simple. And that's why the evaluation bar is going between 0, between 1 for black. And it's just looking very, very good for Nepomniachtchi right now. White, meanwhile, bringing the rook across. And remember, the other thing that we mentioned, the double pawns, yes, they still exist, but black doesn't want to take himself, because now these double pawns will be troubled. And this only helps white open up the rook later on. So, yeah, in the current position, winning chances for black, Ivanka, do you think they're quite high? Do you think they're better than white's drawing chances?
I think... I would say that white's drawing chances are maybe 40%, and black's winning chances are maybe 55%. I know the numbers are not my forte, but...
white winning chances, 5%.
There you go.
If something really wrong happens for black. Yeah, but Magnus, you can see on his face, he's just not feeling... He's not in love with his position right now. Nepomniachtchi... OK, just reroutes his knight.
This is a great move, you know, because I was thinking, you know, the superpower of a knight is to plonk itself in the centre, and if it can do that and it's supported by its pawns, then and if it can't be attacked, it's an outpost. This is the best type of knight. So it made sense for me for Nepomniachtchi to reroute the knight. It's heading to the d4 square.
Yeah, the knight can use both colour complexes to jump in, and it's going to jump into the centre.
Magnus really unhappy with his position. I mean, it's bad.
Understandably, though.
But he's...
OK, he decides, rather than sit passively and wait for black to continue improving the position, he's trying to initiate, or at least trying to open up some lines. He's offering a pawn trade here. To be honest, black can probably just ignore that, but black can fortify his pawn centre. He can push his own pawn to defend the black central pawn. Even if black trades off here, I think Nepomniachtchi is doing very well. Personally, I wouldn't want to trade these set of pawns because then white's bishops might come to life again. But yeah, either way. Magnus, I do like his last move, just from a kind of psychological standpoint. He's showing that it's not going to be one-way traffic. He does have some active ideas of his own. And I think that's just a good tip for everyone at home. If you're struggling, and you're bound to be struggling at some point in some games, then just activate your own pieces, at least create your own ideas, and scare your opponent if possible. Nepomniachtchi now knows it's not going to be completely one-way traffic, at least.
All right, well, maybe a little bit of trouble for Magnus Carlsen in this game. So far, bars in most of the games are, you know, towards the middle, but I'm noticing Levon Aronian had so far had a great day. I think the bar is slightly over to Hans Niemann's side in that game, so that could be interesting. And also, Vincent Keimer, another 17-year-old who seems to be doing great in Game 4 against the great Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. So again, we're probably going to have some fantastic fighting chess and great result. Anish Giri, the bar also going up in his game against Alexander Kostenyuk. So let's see what kind of results we have in round 4 today.
It's interesting you say that, because we actually have a tweet from Tarjei Svensson who says, the stats are showing that the players are fighting.
I love it.
17 out of 24 games have been decisive in the first 3 rounds.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah.
It will be fascinating to compare that to the prelim stage of some of the tournaments last season on the tour. I know compared to classical tournaments, classical chess over the board, I think the draw rate is normally in excess of 60%. So, yeah, these numbers are great. These numbers are promising for the season ahead.
Kudos to the players for giving us fighting chess. That is what we love. Jan Nepomniachtchi, is he feeling confident in this game now, or is it, you know, still a long way to go for him as well?
I think that with his last 2 moves that have appeared on the board, I have suspicion that things are not so clear-cut anymore, because, yes, both rooks are being under-attacked, and, I don't know, the position's suddenly very wild and open, and black's passed pawn majority on the left is going to take a while to get mobilised.
Yeah, and the evaluation bar definitely a bit confused about what is happening here. I must admit, I'm slightly surprised. Black had 3 or 4 ways, I felt, to keep control. Maybe not necessarily pushing forward with the advantage or trying to increase it, but just maintaining the extra pawn, keeping control of all squares, keeping especially the diagonals blocked for the white bishops. But suddenly, OK, Magnus laughing meanwhile. I wonder what that's about. But yeah, suddenly things have opened up, as you mentioned, Ivanka, and white has won a pawn back. It's still double trouble, and it's double set of double pawns right now for white in the centre and on the side of the board. So that's not ideal for white, but yeah, for sure, Magnus will be slightly more optimistic than he was 3 or 4 moves ago. And Nepomniachtchi, that's one thing as well I will mention. Against Magnus in the World Championship match, his technique in better positions wasn't necessarily flawless. And we will see whether he's still able to create something here with black. Meanwhile, white's rook was attacked, and it has moved. So black's bishop now has to decide, does it go back and try and capture a pawn? Which direction does it retreat in? I'm trying to work out the consequences there. I think maybe Magnus is going to escape this game now. Yeah, Jan Nepomniachtchi just... It feels like both players have rushed slightly in critical moments. White earlier rushing when he had an advantage, and suddenly on the defensive side, black having that advantage did rush, and now it's disappeared slightly. It was also due to the counter-attack as well. Earlier, black brought his bishop down, attacking the white rook. Maybe he just forgot that white could counter-attack by capturing a pawn, attacking the black rook. Sometimes, yeah, the players need to just take an extra few seconds to work out the consequences there. Meanwhile, Nepomniachtchi rushing back to the board doesn't take a few seconds. He does capture that central pawn. So black, again, 1 pawn up. But there are tactics in the position. Suddenly, white's bishop, if it does move, might allow an attack against the black bishop in the centre from white's rook at the bottom of the board there. You've got to be careful how you do it. White's bishop as well on the 6th rank is kind of, it's got X-ray vision by the black rook. It is kind of indirectly attacked.
Yeah.
There's so much going on.
There is definitely a lot going on. And I'm also looking at those beautiful pawns on the left. You know, nice chain, but can be destabilized actually by those double pawns. So it's not easy at all.
No, I think now is the time, though, for Magnus. He needs something over the next 3 or 4 moves to justify being a pawn down. Otherwise, I think once the black knight joins the action, it's going to be trouble for white. So, yeah, the black knight just needs maybe 2 moves to get into the game. So Magnus has this small window of opportunity to create something, create some threats. Nepomniachtchi looks pretty happy, though. Knowing him, he probably thinks he's winning.
But how is the knight going to get mobilized? Because, you know, it's not too many squares for it to jump to. So, I mean, if it jumps in front of its rook, well, then it's a little bit awkward. Maybe some pinning going on there. And if it jumps... Sorry.
Yeah, for example, just to show your idea, there would be a pin on this line. Carry on, Ivanka.
And if the knight did jump to the 6th row, well, then it would disrupt the coordination of the rook along the 6th row.
So, yeah, maybe not an ideal square for black right now. Magnus, instead of just playing a useless move, I was just demonstrating here what black's plans are, he did improve his rook. I should also mention, some viewers at home were probably wondering why the bishop can't jump out the way, taking a pawn, attacking this black bishop. But after the pawn recaptures, yes, you get the black bishop, but suddenly the rook has opened up against the white bishop. And at the very end, black would emerge with an extra knight. So that is why Magnus couldn't go for that tactic. It doesn't quite work. That's why we also always look 1 move extra, 1 move further, in case we've missed anything. He brings his rook across 1 square. And I think this has an idea of lining up against this vulnerable f7 pawn. Actually, this f7 pawn, we say at the start of chess, when we teach beginners, that's the most vulnerable pawn. It's only defended by a king. And while the tactics have started, the black rook brought itself up 1 square, defending this pawn. And Magnus, has he just thrown away a pawn for free? Or is there a sneaky idea behind this?
Well,
this is very clever.
If you take the pawn with the rook, then, OK, the white bishop will sneak its way to the 8th row, and that would not be a good news for Nepomniachtchi.
Skewer, yep. Hitting both the black rooks.
And if you take with the pawn...
If you take with the pawn, I guess the idea is now you've severed the connection on the 6th rank for black's rooks, and now you could finally break the tension over here, trade these set of pawns, and at the very end, white's rook would leap into the game. Black is still a pawn up, but suddenly there are huge threats, for example, of pinning the black knight on this rank, this pawn under fire. Suddenly, everything's opening up, as you notice. All the diagonals are starting to open, and therefore, this will favour the bishops. Suddenly, I think white is doing very, very well. So Magnus, super sharp, spotting that. This would not even be on my radar, I must admit. You're pushing a pawn forward to a square where it can be captured in 3 different ways. But all of the ways have their downsides. So pawn forward, it has to be captured. I'm starting to think maybe the best is to capture with this rook, Ivanka, just give up some material. And after the bishop does come forward with this skewer...
You've got to protect your pride and glory and just move the rook to the 6th row. And
after a trade here, you still protect your pawns. Actually, maybe it's easier for white to play because long-term you will be able... Whoops, sorry, me and my arrows again. Long-term you will be able to start targeting some of these black pawns on the queen side. But either way, Nepomniachtchi has a huge decision to make. Does he give up material, or does he allow white to break through with his pawns on this flank?
You know, I think that pawn move is maybe a game changer. Yeah. And I have a suspicion that it's so shocking that it will be Nepomniachtchi who might lose the thread and even throw away the game.
Yeah, game changer is a great phrase for it. It just changes the momentum completely. Yeah. Black was in control, covered all the squares. Black probably thought he had this square covered in every way imaginable. It's literally protected 3 times. But Magnus says, no, this ruins the coordination behind your pieces. And yeah, no matter which way you capture now, there's going to be a huge problem. So, OK, maybe you just take this way and then... I don't know, just leave it, push a pawn and hope that you're OK here. In a situation like this, black would have a knight and 2 pawns for the white rook, which is roughly level material. At least then maybe you could try and jump in with the black knight as well. This is the best I can see right now, but it does take guts and courage to give up some material after this pawn push, to give up one of the black rooks for a white bishop.
Yeah, I think he has to do it. And whilst we're waiting for Nepomniachtchi to react to this really shocking move, I have one final rhyme. And this is from Airthings, our sponsor of the tournament. And this is pawns when stacked get attacked.
Wow.
Oh.
Lovely one.
Well, you know, when you have great air quality, you will come up with great rhymes like that.
Yeah, exactly.
It just has to happen. Airthings also monitoring the air quality for our players. Obviously, you need great air quality to play great chess. And, well, maybe Magnus's air quality is improving right now.
Yep, his position on the board is definitely improving. And we saw he actually had decent levels of CO2, decent stats there. It was very warm. I couldn't play in such warm temperatures like Magnus does. 26 degrees, as we see on the screen. But either way, his position has improved and he's picking up the speed. So normally we see players, you know, their level does deteriorate over the course of the day. Magnus, that did happen in the last round, struggling there, but he's picking things up now. And suddenly we did actually see the knight capture that white pawn in the centre. So black's pawns on the left side have just been eliminated. White is still a pawn down, though. So white is the one fighting for the draw, despite the fact things are much better for him now than they were just a few moves ago. And meanwhile, black is pushing Harry the H-pawn, trying to break through to the white king.
Yeah, and there is a big problem in the air for Magnus, which is how is he going to defend his king? And the first threat is pawn takes pawn, rook takes pawn, winning. And if you're careless and just play passively, then the black knight was actually threatening to come to the g5 square and maybe even deliver checkmate.
Ooh, actually, yeah, let's show that on the board, Ivanka, because that's a very pretty checkmate. White has actually just eliminated that black knight, but if he hadn't, for example, if he just dropped back with the bishop defending this pawn, this is the idea you mentioned, right? It looks like this black knight is pinned along this line, but nope, it can jump forward. And after rook takes rook, this would be a really stylish checkmate. Do you know the name of this checkmate? I don't.
Yeah, I think it's called the suffocation mate.
Suffocation mate, the knight checking the king. But let's catch up with the moves. White decided that was too dangerous, eliminating the black knight. And after the pawn captured, white gave a check. And is white going to be sneaking out and try and threaten checkmate, team up his rooks at the top of the board and try and sneak behind the black king and trap it?
Well, he's threatening it in a different way.
In a different, using a different angle. He's brought his rook up, attacking the bishop and attacking this pawn. Let's go back to the players because the moves are coming thick and fast. Black gave a check and now black pinned the white rook, as we see there on the F-line. White's rook can no longer move and Magnus still frowning. He knows he still has work to do to save this game. Opposite colour bishops, though, if all of the rooks disappear, it's going to be a draw. So Magnus, he's still a pawn down, but he does have this saving grace of trying to trade off all the rooks if he can.
OK, so is that then Jan Nepomniachtchi's main objective now, to just keep them on the board?
He'll want to keep one set of rooks.
OK, he doesn't need both of them.
Not necessarily. I think now he's offered a trade of one set of rooks. That's just to secure the black king. He knew the black king was about to come under fire from the two white rooks, so trading one is fine. And, OK, Magnus goes and grabs a pawn.
I'm not sure about that grab.
You're not sure?
I really am not sure, because it gives black the opportunity to actually advance Harry one more square, and suddenly white's pawn on h2 is a huge liability. If that falls, it's going to be trouble.
Actually, that's a great move, Ivanka, pushing that black pawn forward one square, fixing a weakness. And actually, that black pawn, the h-pawn, if it does move forward, is 2 squares away from promotion. It promotes on a light square, supported by black's bishop in the middle. Oof, the more I look at this, the more I think white is in for some real suffering if that happens. I'm also wondering whether you can give a check at some point or whether you can bring the black rook across. But Nepomniachtchi was shaking his head, which makes me think maybe he's doubting his winning chances here, even though there's still a lot of life left in this position. And the evaluation bar backs up your conclusion that black is doing very well.
Oh, look at Magnus Carlsen.
Is he laughing?
Yeah.
Is he laughing at his own moves, his own play? Is he laughing?
Oh, it's intense as well.
Yeah. Anytime we question him about it, though, he always seems to conveniently forget his reason for laughing.
Should we keep asking, though?
Why not? Why not?
Maybe one day he's going to answer us. Maybe one day he's going to tell us the joke he is thinking about.
Yeah. I wouldn't be laughing about this position, Ivanka. I would be terrified that I was still in trouble.
I don't think I would be laughing, especially in this time control. But then, on the other hand, I have actively tried to do this technique of laughing when I'm in a bad position, and it's worked.
Ooh.
To get inside your opponent's mind.
Well, kind of like you kind of relax and you're like, well, you know, made a mess of this.
Life is good despite the position.
Not my proudest moment. What's going to happen? Let's see if I can save this.
Yeah.
OK, so will Magnus save this? So a set of rooks have come off the board. I'm expecting Jan now to bring his rook actually to the corner, the black rook, to target that white h-pawn. Once that falls, black still has this huge trump card up his sleeve. And I think white's still in a bit of trouble there. Magnus, he's refocused, but Nepomniachtchi doesn't look happy. Why is he shaking his head? He's still got a great position. And no risk as well. Anytime Nepomniachtchi wants, he can probably swap off the rooks and just guide the game towards a draw. So no risk. He can play on here.
Yeah, I don't really see anything because it does look on a superficial level that maybe white has everything covered. But, you know, once the black pawn gets to h3, you know, there's going to be a little bit of a barrier to white's defence along the second row. But not this way, actually. I'm not happy with the way that Nepomniachtchi's done this. Yeah,
it feels like he's missed the moment. And, yeah, suddenly the white rook has got back to its kind of a great defensive square, covering the second rank. That's where black's rook should be, trying to target those white pawns on the second rank. So, yeah, white's rook now just locking down some defence, and yeah, it feels like Nepomniachtchi may be missing his moment. That being said, the black king will start to enter the position. Black is still the one who should have the winning chances. I think white is still fighting for the draw, and there we go. The black king does finally remember to join the party. And it's not actually going to be easy to track its entry into the white position. That black king is going to continue marching. White now is banking a lot on his passed pawn, the one he's just pushed.
But unfortunately, it's not going to get so far because you can even get to the 7th row, but it's not moving to the promotion square at all.
Exactly. It's going to be covered by black's bishop in the centre. And now we go with some checks, slightly mysterious checks. Black's rook is kind of taking the long way round. It could have, I mean, it was on the first rank just a few moves ago. Slightly surprising that black rook is going after white's pawn over there, that passed pawn on the left. But it's slow. Where will white put the king? Magnus still needs to be highly accurate to save this game. Which way would you go, Jovanka? 3 squares. OK, he went to the centre.
Yeah, I'm tempted to go to the centre as well, you know, and actually maybe even a bit further to try to support this pawn on the left.
But maybe you can't keep that pawn. Black's rook is now attacking that white pawn. How do you maintain it? Maybe you don't. And that pawn does it has just dropped off. If the white rook went to protect that pawn, which I mentioned, then the white rook would have evacuated the second rank, and black's rook would have pounced with some deadly checks. So black's gone a pawn up. Black's actually been a pawn up for most of the game. And he's a pawn up again. And the rooks are still on the board. That is the key. So white will not be safe until he's able to trade a set of rooks.
And this is a very sneaky move from Magnus. So he's threatening to slide the rook to g1 square, give a check, and actually grab the pawn on g7.
Yep, so black giving a check himself. Will white block that check? If white's king moves out the way, then the black rook will swing the whole way across the board and capture.
Yeah,
oh, actually, maybe it can't. Maybe there's a trick in the position. I was about to suggest an awful blunder. Maybe we can show this on the board because there is one trick. White now, the safest move is to block the second rank, block this rook trade. The rook is protected by its bishop. OK, he does go for this. I was going to say he can maybe just move his king forward because after rook takes pawn, which I wanted to suggest, suddenly pawn forward check. And there's a discovered attack against the black rook. Once black replies to that check, the rook would fall and white would be the one winning. So, OK, instead, Magnus not setting that trap. He blocked with his rook, protected by the bishop. Rook trades would lead to a draw, so black retreated. And now white, again, going back this way round, as Jovanka mentioned, to try and capture this black pawn on the dark square.
There was a sneaky trick in the position that Magnus set. And just, if we can go back one tiny move, and if the rook had gone to the first row, then the black rook can go to the 7th and attack, and again, use the discovered attack.
The white rook could have, jumped forward, and a discovered attack against black's rook, also attacking this pawn. So both sides are actually setting some small tricks here and there. Let's catch up with the current position. Black's king now about to enter. Can it sneak forward, or is there no time? Maybe white needs to stop this advance of the black king, bring the white rook across, not fear ghosts of a discover check here. He's done it, because if the black bishop moves with a discover check, as it has done, this is a check, the white king just moves out the way, and still awkward for white. Look at this rook, blocked in now by black's bishop, but suddenly this white pawn is pretty safe. It's going to be nigh on impossible to actually attack this pawn. White is going to hold everything on the dark squares. And, okay, wow, risky move by white. I would be scared of rook takes bishop now, and then bring the king in, but maybe it's all under control. Let's go back to the players. We're going to see a manoeuvring stage. White, if he wants to hold this game, if Magnus wants to hold the draw, is still going to have to defend for a long, long time. 57 moves. Do you think we'll see 100, Ivanka?
No, I don't think. I think Nepomniachtchi has maybe not played it so accurately, because Magnus actually has the idea of recentralizing the bishop to the e5 square and the rook actually coming to the 7th row. You can even give up the pawn because the black king is so awkwardly placed.
Possibly. Yeah, so maybe we'll see that move now by white. That would require some calculation. Black's pawn maybe pushing forward. Oof. Yeah, maybe some checks from the black rook. Still a lot to consider. I'm going to say it now. I think this move is going to go over this game is going to go over 100 moves. Or at least it would if I was playing.
Well, we know these two can play long games as well. Longest game in World Championship history. Yeah. Game 6 in Dubai.
Yeah, what was it? 130? 130 something moves. Yeah, 7 hours and 45 minutes. I should remember that,
yeah.
I mean, that was a long day. We were here for 9 hours in the studio.
Yeah. What a crazy day. Oh, up until the time control with 40 moves, so dramatic, and then...
Yeah, black was better, then white was better, then it was just a draw for the next 50 moves, and then Magnus finally wore down his opponent. OK, the rook does come across. OK,
but this does allow black to give a check with the rook.
Yeah.
And allow the black king to enter.
Yeah, so will we see Nepomniachtchi, once he returns, give a check with the black rook? The alternative would be to once again block the white rook by bringing the black bishop down in front of it. So, yeah, black now can just kind of maneuver, kind of go round and round in circles, hoping for a mistake. And as the clocks tick down, the more likely it will become that Magnus does eventually slip up.
We should mention that there is a big trap in the position. Huge danger.
There's a threat.
There is a threat, and it's a checkmating threat, my favourite thing. And if Nepomniachtchi is really careless and maybe just picks up the pawn, moves it one square.
It's attacked. Yep.
Yeah, the rook will come to give a deadly check on the g5 square, and that would be checkmate.
Yep, the kiss of death.
Yeah, definitely something that Nepomniachtchi won't fall for, so that's why he gives a check. And Magnus steps his king back.
So hitting the white king there, the king had to retreat. Has it retreated the right way? That is the question, the white king. This pawn is maybe going to drop off. That's the problem for Nepomniachtchi. The more pawns that disappear, the closer white will get to the draw. There's no real way to save it.
You can save it by putting the bishop back to the blockading square.
OK, but then I guess the bishop will just capture this pawn, potentially.
Yeah, and then it will be a trade.
It will be a trade, and black does have 1+ pawn, so still some glimmer of hope. Nepomniachtchi, meanwhile, chose a different option. In this position, he just pushed it forward 1 square, and now Magnus does have the option, if he wants, of giving a check. But I don't think black would actually capture this pawn. Maybe he could, but maybe he'll just march into the position with his king. Actually, OK, we'll find out now.
We'll find out.
He does march in with his king, and now the white bishop is attacked, the white pawn is attacked. Where is the bishop going to go? You've got to be really careful. If you go to the centre now, I just have a feeling that things are going to start to crumble. Black's rook will come and try and target this vital pawn. It's actually all about this guy, right, Ivanka?
Yeah.
If this pawn falls, black will win. Black has this pawn 2 squares away. So, Magnus, what is he going to do with this bishop?
Aside from dropping it all the way back.
I mean, this is ugly, but is it necessary, maybe, to just guard this pawn long term?
I mean, could he have any dirty tricks up his sleeve? So, for instance, if he puts his bishop in the middle of the board...
Black rook, say it steps across.
Yeah, it steps across. And now I need something clever, because my idea is actually once the black rook attacks and grabs that pawn, then maybe there might be some pawn pushes.
OK, so you want to push this pawn out the way eventually and defend.
And it looks like Magnus has the same idea, but how do you orchestrate it so that it works.
Yeah, let's go back to the players, though, because I think this move, rook across and rook down, targeting this pawn, is going to be very strong for black, and the evaluation bar has shot up in black's favour. Yeah. So this is what we're talking about. Objectively, this endgame might be a draw, but it requires such precision, and it's nearly impossible in a rapid game with 2 minutes on your clock to find the best moves every time.
Clocks are ticking. Look at that. Nepomniachtchi down to 3 minutes on the clock. Ding Liren and Liam Le have finished their game. Ding Liren winning that one. So Ding, he is now on top of the table with 10 points. 3 wins today for Ding Liren. Amazing.
Yeah, and he's earned his night of sleep. It's, what is it, nearly 5 a.m. now in China?
It's so late. Impressive stuff. He has had quite an easy start to the tournament with a few of the lower-rated players in the tournament. But nevertheless, fantastic first day for Ding Liren. Currently on top of the table. I don't think anyone can... Esipenko could, if Esipenko wins this game, he can catch up with him. Let's see if that happens. All right, but in this one, Magnus Carlsen could be about to go on another loss.
Yeah, he needs to find something really clever here to save this game. So black didn't use the route that I was advocating. He didn't go to the edge of the board. Instead, he's trying to sneak across and deliver a check to the white king. So that's why the white king has stopped the black rook coming down. OK, Nepomniachtchi is surprised by that one. That looks like a very clever move, but the white king might be in some danger. There are some checkmating ideas against it. Oof, if you imagine the black king coming down 1 square, the black bishop moving to the side, the black rook is ready and primed to deliver some checks or checkmates.
Yeah, once the black king steps forward, the white king is in a cage, like you say. And even trading off rooks is not necessarily going to save him because suddenly there's a passed pawn on the H-line.
Yeah.
So dangerous, dangerous stuff for Magnus.
Yeah,
wow.
I'm amazed he's looking so calm, Magnus, just because it's such a scary position to deal with. And it's such a one-sided position. If you defend perfectly, you get a draw. But on every move, there are so many pitfalls. One slip, and you're just going to be checkmated, or black's H-pawn is going to promote to a new queen. So much can go wrong. OK, so Nepomniachtchi is actually setting the trap. So black's next move, if Magnus is careless, is to step forward with the black king 1 square. And... has he just allowed it? OK, I think he's got a defence in mind, and that is simply to bring the white rook the whole way back to the first rank to stop any potential checks. That's why Nepomniachtchi flicked in the check. I agree with you, Vanka. I would have probably gone for that anyway as black, just creating some checkmate ideas. Now white's king is out of the cage, out of the box. The white king's run to safety. But is that H-pawn doomed? Black's rook is ready to go across 2 squares and capture. How do you save it? It's not easy. White now has to hope for a miracle. OK, that pawn has disappeared, and OK, I think Magnus running out of ideas here. I'm surprised the evaluation bar is only saying +2 for black, because that black pawn is so close to promotion.
That is 2 squares.
Yeah, now if the rooks come off, it's definitely not a draw anymore. There's no safety net there, because black's pawn is destined to become a queen. And
Nepomniachtchi doing something very smart. He's using his king to blockade the motion, the range of white's bishop. And,
look at that.
But Magnus is smiling.
Yeah.
But, I mean...
that looked like an ironic smile. And has he just resigned?
I think he's just resigned. Black was about to make a new queen. That black pawn is going to cost white the rook. Maybe Magnus missed something. I'm not sure what it was, though, because that was very logical play by black. And there we go. The world champion loses for a 2nd game in a row.
Wow. Kudos to Nepomniachtchi, though. I mean, obviously, it's not the big revenge after losing the world championship match, but a great game by him.
Yep, a great game. Maybe it wasn't as smooth as he would have liked, but he was always slightly better, after the opening at least. He always had a small advantage. White was always on the back foot. And, yeah, the Russian taking the points.